anything they'd like to share or start with?
I'll ask a question. Why would someone be requested to go to the judge's chamber? Would it be a more private matter?
You've sort of frozen there. So, judgment chamber?
Judges.
Judges chamber, okay. Depends really on what that really is referring to, in that the judges, there's obviously, you have the court of judges, and there are people who are judges. So in a sense, it's really, what is it actually referring to? Is it a judge that's part of another court? You know, I think there's lots of different. We could actually look at a chamber, because you think of any court have chambers attached to that court, which could potentially a judge's chamber, which is not the court of judges. I guess if you're being invited to a chamber of a particular court, it would depend on what court it was to determine what. When you're invited into the judges' chambers there, I mean, obviously the court of judges would make the most sense, but that's a pretty high-level court. So I'm not sure really. What was the context of it?
It was a verdict that I was told to go to the judge's chamber. It was like, it was more of a, to me, it seemed like it would be more of a personal matter to be discussed behind closed doors or something. Just guessing, just.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely could. What happened when you went there?
I just went there by faith, pretty much so, because I wasn't, you know, I just didn't understand, I guess. I got my reasoning in the way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the thing would be to go back. You know, go back and
That's true.
You know, if you have a, you know, if there's a particular issue with anything like that, yeah, I would look to go back and re-engage it and see if there's anything specific that comes. You know, I've never personally been into any chamber behind anything. Generally, I just get on with it and get on and do whatever I need to do.
Yeah.
But, you know, there could be something potentially, I guess, that could be very private, and you need a conversation with it, particularly if you're in the court of accusation. In that court, you know, I guess there could be something that the judge wanted to engage you with, perhaps. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pamela is saying that she's been there as well. All right, thank you.
Mike, I wanted to share something that, you know, as the Lord continues to teach me about the court, and He's actually called me to spend more time in the court of accusation. He says family members have been calling me in, asking for me to come in and represent or advocate for some of their, you know, family on earth. So, but he started talking to me about what's going on. He says people are being they're coming in, and the fear of the unknown has stopped them from operating or standing in a lot of faith.
Your mute button keeps going on and off.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay. He was saying that people are coming in a lot, and the fear of the unknown is keeping them from standing in faith. That they are fearing the unknown of their genealogy. That, you know, what their ancestors may have done, et cetera, and it's preventing them from standing in faith. So then he started talking about Melchizedek and how he had no genealogy, and how we're called to be, you know, he's calling forth the Melchizedek order. Then he said, "You're of my seed, my genealogy. Tell people they're of my genealogy." And he said, "And I want you to ask for their adoption."
As far as
Can you hear me?
you're
Are you hearing me?
breaking up totally.
He's saying to ask for their adoption papers to be presented publicly, and that they're of his seed. He gave me a strategy in court. Can you hear me?
So,
Let me see what I can do. I'll come back with a question or with that. Are you there, Mike? Did we lose him, Patricia? Are you hearing me? Could you hear me? And just he couldn't? Okay. Okay. Okay.
okay, we'll try it again now. Maybe the connection was a little bit.
Yeah. What he was saying to me is that people are coming to court and not standing in faith because of the fear of the unknown about their genealogy and what their ancestors have done, you know, what curses, et cetera, et cetera. And then he started talking to me about Melchizedek having no genealogy, and that we're moving into the Melchizedek order. And then he said, "I want you to start asking for their adoption papers to be presented publicly in court, that they are of my seed." And I'm like, okay. And he says that will do a lot for all those genealogy questions. Present their adoption papers publicly in court. I'm like, okay. And then he surprised me. He said, and then when that is established, I want you to ask for reciprocity for their natural lines, genealogy lines. And I'm like, oh, wow. He said it's the same thing as one, you know, as sin entered through one man, sin was abolished through one man. This one man can have their genealogy cleaned by adoption and then ask for reciprocity through their line. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Now, I've done it a couple times, and it, you know, it lightens people up a lot. What do you think of that?
Yeah, sounds interesting. I know when I went to Satan's Trophy Room, one of the areas of Satan's Trophy Room was heritage. And heritage is, again, things that we should have had passed on to us through our family lines. So I guess you may be looking at a restoration of our heritage, those things that have been robbed from us from previous generations that God wants to restore to us in this generation. That was definitely something that the enemy had, and I saw, you know, in my own family line, I saw a whole areas of things that should have been passed on to me. So yeah, it sounds, you know, very much like the restoration of all things. Because if God is going to restore all things, then he must restore to us everything that's been robbed in our family lines. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that sounds good.
I do have one more question before I shut up for everybody else.
Go on.
You know how you've been talking about our mountains and how each of our 7 mountains are tweaked. They're a little different according to our own calling and training, individuality. You know, each 7 mountain is different. I've been looking at wisdom's pillars. And I've been reading where, these are the 7 pillars. But you know what? Wisdom is showing me slightly different things. Showing me courage, discernment, grace, and mercy as if they're pillars. And I'm like, could this be a similar principle that in your calling and walk, the pillars wisdom shows you are just tweaked to your own personality, your own experience. What do you think about that? I mean, I've only seen 4 of them, but
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Wisdom's pillars. Recently, I've been engaging them recently, and a friend of mine has been doing some engagement with them, and he has engaged them from the perspective of when you have a mandate or you have a blueprint, then you can present it to the different pillars, and they help in the fulfillment of that mandate or blueprint or the development of it until it's ready to be put into place. So he's had a number of occasions where there have been blueprints or mandates given, but there's not been a clarity about exactly what that is. And he's taken it to wisdom's pillars, and wisdom's pillars in the pillars, it's like, they're not just a sort of a, once you go into them, there are rooms and various things in there that you then can present a blueprint or a mandate, a scroll, and have it developed in a process. So if you think about that for the scroll of your own life and the scroll of destiny, then certainly by engaging there, it is going to give a revelation of how your destiny can be outworked. So I would think that might well be a potential illustration of that. And of course, these things are so multi-dimensional that you may engage wisdom's pillars in a totally different way than others, because of the very nature that you're unique, and you are, these things are tailored to us. Heaven is an environment that is uniquely available for us to engage in. So maybe that's some of what you're looking at there, perhaps. Because a lot of people want to sort of, okay, you have 7 mountains. How do those 7 mountains relate to your destiny? Those spheres. Maybe that's an aspect of it, that when you engage wisdom's pillars, you begin to unravel your destiny in a way that reveals it and enables you to fulfill it. Because those 7 mountains are very, very different for different people. I've talked to people where the names of their mountains and the spheres of their mountains were just totally different than anything I'd heard anyone else talk about. So, it's again an opportunity of finding out and developing that in our own lives. Okay. Anyone else got anything they want to share?
Hi, Mike. This is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
So, last year, I started really looking into the areas that Father wanted me to have a bench of 3, and the areas that he wanted me to legislate in, and it was really going very well. It was getting people together and looking at the mandates, and something happened. Something happened, like he kept me in this place, like I know he was putting me through the fire,
Yeah.
but it was so intense, Mike, that the focus on the legislation, I wasn't able to focus on it. Not that not that I didn't want to. It was whatever he was doing with me. In terms of
Mm.
working on my gateways, it was really intense, and so much that it caught me to focus a lot. I had to be so intentional with everything that I was doing, and it was so hard to share. It was so personal, but in the midst of it, I experienced a lot of joy. But it was kind of bittersweet. Bittersweet. It was really so. I still go and I view the information, and like I'll be on the calls and I listen, and then I'll get up and say, okay, I'm going to start again. But then something else happens, like he'll put a catalyst. He always has a catalyst that comes in, and then I have to go through that. Like I have to walk through the fire, and then I'll come out transformed again. I go, wow, now again, I'll start this, and then something occurs again, and I know it's him. So I was just wondering. I'm like, should I just go ahead and just keep doing while I'm going through this period where he's really working with putting me through the fire and refining me? And I know that's always going to be ongoing. And or like, how do you do the two?
Okay. Well, it sounds very much that you're going through the preparation process for being able to live in dual realms and be able to engage in a deeper dimension. In a sense, a lot of our journeys are not ideal. They're not how we would choose them all to be in order. So yeah, I'm going to do this, and then it's going to be a plain sailing, and everything's going to be smooth. We're sort of learning on the job, and I would say that the level of authority for a bench of 3, being part of a bench of 3, the legislating for that does require a level of refinement and purification that you really have to be willing to go through. And it may be that God is just saying, actually, don't try and push into all these things until the time when I release you to do it in fullness. Because there's a difference between desire and our willingness to engage, say, learn to do some of those legislative things, and the level of maturity, holiness, different things in our lives which will enable us to do them. And I went through exactly the same processes myself, and fortunately for me, they were before I came into sort of bench of 3 revelation, but I was still in leadership and involved in all the teaching stuff that I'm doing. But this happened to me in 2011-12. Exactly the same thing. A restriction put on me so that I needed to go through an intense preparation. And in fact, that's what I'm sharing in the Engaging God program, in the end of the Gateways thing with the soaking room. So we looked at the garden, looked at the dance floor, but the soaking room is that sense where you are in the fire of God and you're being refined in the crucible. It can be like a transformation process, a metamorphosis, like the to get a butterfly that can fly, the caterpillar has to go into the cocoon in the chrysalis, and intense heat, and turns to mush, and eventually all its genes are switched on, and the DNA changes take place in terms of switching on the butterfly genes that are there but were switched off before, but were triggered by going into the chrysalis and being subjected to intense heat. And the same, for me, I did a couple of sessions on it, being in the soaking room, one of them is being baptized in the river of fire. And it is an intense process. And ultimately, that preparation for marriage, we're looking at the marriage process, so you're looking at the mikvah, which is in preparation for the ketubah to be agreed, and then for consummation to take place. That's a preparation of eventually going into the dark cloud, and that's an even intenser place that when you engage that will totally change everything. You know, my experiences in the dark cloud completely changed everything about the relationship between my soul and spirit, and freed me to be living in dual realms and untethered from the earth and everything. So you just have to be willing to continue the process. I wouldn't try and push into legislative government while you're going through that process. Personally, I think the fact that whenever you come through it and then you go to look to do that again and then there's more is an indication that that's the season you're in. So embrace that season, and God knows your heart, and God knows your willingness. He knows that you're willing to engage in legislation. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't listen to legislation sessions or be involved in the legislation groups. It's just that actually outworking that, God is obviously saying, you know, I want to prepare you for what you're going to be doing, and therefore there's this process of preparation that takes place. You know, and I would encourage you, and I don't know where you are in the Engaging God program, but you know, listen to those sessions, because they do share, you know, what I went through over, you know, a couple of year period, which was very intense, leading up to a total change. And the next session I'll do in a couple of weeks' time will be about the dark cloud and how that really dealt with my soul in a way that everything else was leading up to. And until I went through the same sort of process that you're describing, embracing the fire, you know, then I would not have been able to go into that dark cloud. Even in going into the dark cloud, it took a whole different level of change and transformation in my life going in there, beyond anything I'd ever experienced before. But subsequent to that, everything changed in such a way that I was free. You know, my soul, my spirit were separated and reintegrated in oneness, wholeness. Therefore, I can live with my spirit in heaven, my soul here, and flowing from one to the other all the time, whereas I couldn't do it before that. You know, so God challenged my identity and where my identity was coming from a redemptive gift purpose sense. You know, was I getting my identity from doing things? No, I think people describe the dark cloud as, you know, as a dark night of the soul, or different descriptions to describe God really dealing with the essence of who you are, how he made you, but not using that to give you your identity, but doing those things from the identity that you have in relationship with God rather than works. And it was a very, very intense process for me, very, very intense, which, you know, that whole process was one which essentially set me free to be able to then function as I do now. I couldn't do what I'm doing now as it was before. You know, it was just never gonna work from that perspective. But you know, I definitely found that there was a process leading up to that went deeper and deeper and deeper, and it felt more hot, and it felt heat. You know, the whole thing was a very transforming process, but it's never easy, is it, to be in a crucible and God turn the heat up? Yeah, because what happens, obviously, all the dross comes to the surface when the heat is turned up, and you have to have it scooped off and then because God wants pure gold. He wants your life, your scroll, to be gold, silver, and precious stones. To turn a lump of coal into a diamond, you have to put intense heat and pressure on it, and ultimately you can get something beautiful out of something that started off as a black lump of carbon that can end up as a beautiful diamond. But the process is intense heat and pressure.
Well,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm experiencing. But it's interesting. Is phenomena is that I'm experiencing so much joy, and I know it's from him because the Holy Spirit has taught me how to use joy even as a weapon, so I'm able to use that, but I have to be really intentional about it. Like, I know what the triggers are now, so I know exactly how to identify what's coming. But what it's like a byproduct, or what has come out of all of this is that I've noticed that my authority, like, I have to be very careful what I say or what I think now. And an example, I was at a conference yesterday at work, and I had prayed for the team I was working with, and one particular person, I had like a sense of what the personality was. I was meeting her for the first time, and I was spot on, and I had prayed for her, and at the end of the event, the very thing I prayed about her, she started telling me that's how she was, and that was not the actions she displayed. And what I prayed was that she would be calm, she would be peaceful, and some other things. And she started saying the exact thing. And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And, so I'm having a lot of incidents like that where whatever I say out of my mouth is I actually see it happening. And I know it came out of, this period that I've been going through.
I'm sure it did. And I think that's the purpose of these things, to enable God to give us more authority, because he can entrust us with that authority. I fully believe that the level of authority that we carry in the heavens and then outworked on the earth is proportional to the level of holiness that's operating in our lives. God isn't going to give, a machine gun to a baby, and therefore, if you can imagine everything that you have said out of your mouth coming about, then you'd probably want to take some of the things that have come out back. So it's better. So what God is doing is refining, purifying in our hearts, so that when we speak, we're speaking out of a pure heart, rather than out of a mixture. And so, the purifying of our heart is removing that mixture, and that mixture hinders, I think, the level of what God can release to us. But I think it's a process that more and more people are going to have to go through. If you, as you say, treat it as a joyful thing, treat it as all joy, James says, brothers, when you encounter various trials and things. And so I think, in that, I think the encouragement would be, embrace these things, because they are really, really important in our process of transformation. Anyone else got anything they want to share?
I experienced something different the other day. I've been judging angels, and when I minister to people, I will judge their angels that I discern, because their angels sometimes they just come, they kind of come forward wanting to be judged. They really like being judged. So, hush, baby. So I went to trading floor with a friend. We went together, and it was interesting because her angel was there too, and he like took off what appeared to be signet or armor or something, and actually traded it for better. I couldn't explain it, but it was like I had been judging this angel, and he just got sort of decorated on the trading floor. It was interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that, but he had a different breastplate and different insignia on it. And I know these are just images that so we can understand what's going on. But it was like he traded for better armor or better weapons or something. It was interesting.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, these sort of experiences, they're going deeper, and you're finding new things that are unveiled in these things in the experience. So I'm sure, as when I've engaged different either angels or Jesus in different ways, I've engaged him in so many different ways. He's appeared, as a lion. Sometimes he's appeared as Jesus you would recognize from the Bible, that type of Jesus. Sometimes, there's just been what he's wearing or is symbolic of something that I'm connecting to, and how that then begins to outwork is interesting to see. And I have obviously journal most of my experiences in these sort of things. So, I have a record of when Jesus came and looked like this, then he spoke to me about this. It had a different flavor to it. Yeah.
Hey, may I? Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
It's RJ. Hey, listen, I want to apologize to everybody. I'm going to be jumping into a conference. I'm in Louisiana on a conference, and I just didn't want to miss out on this. But I was just curious, Pamela, about judging angels, or Mike. That's something I had a totally different. So I'd love to hear more about that and what that means for us today. Just something unusual.
Well, we're called in Corinthians, it says we will judge angels, and everything we're doing does not require us to go into the age to come to do that. So, in a sense, the judgment of angels, I know Pamela's engagement with this is almost to thank them and to pass judgment on what they're doing and give them a reward, or give them a thanks. So it's not judging them and saying, that you've done terrible things. There are obviously fallen angels that we will have to judge in that way. But this is a more positive sense of judgment, is to pass judgment on their work with us and what they're doing with us, and to give them thanks and commendation, if you like, for what they're doing, and they really seem to like it. But
okay, I've heard that. I've heard that before, and I just want to be clear, because it's more like assessing or just saying, and judging has just such a other connotation that when I hear that, I immediately think, oh, are angels?
Yeah, but that's
but thank you for
the word judgment has a very negative connotation. And wrongly so, because judgment is just passing a verdict. So, an assessment is a judgment. You're judging someone's work. We just think of judgment in relating to punishment. In the court, well, the judge is going to punish me. Well, it doesn't have to be that at all. Most of the understanding of judgment is not negative. It's to pass a verdict. And that verdict can be a positive verdict. Everything that you do gets judged by God, and that gets added to your scroll as gold, silver, and precious stones, or wood, hay, and stubble. So you can have a judgment which is a good judgment, and that when it comes to the angelic realm that we're operating with, that's what we're saying. There may well be in the future, when we do get to judge the fallen angels, then the judgment will obviously not be so good. The recommendation won't be so good. But we tend to, unfortunately, the sort of religious system associates judgment almost with just punishment. God is going to judge me, he's going to punish me. So they say God is judging the world, or he's judging the US, or he's judging the UK, and there's
a lot of that going around.
The way they say it is that he is going to punish. Well, he doesn't punish. His judgment, even when there's a judgment of this is not correct, is to give people the opportunity of crossing over that line into what is correct. It's always judgment to life and not death. And you have so many people who are sort of doom and gloom, you know, oh, God is judging America because they're doing this, this, and this, and therefore, you know, these climatic situations, that's God's judgment and that stuff. They don't understand the word judgment, and they're using it in a completely false way. It is always redemptive. You know, it's always to bring life. It's always to bring good. You know, I encountered God in eternity a while ago, and he showed me his reaction and response to everything that was going on in the world, every choice everyone makes every second, and you can think of 7 billion choices at the moment, and if you think of all the people who've ever lived, and I think there's somewhere around 106 billion people that have ever lived, apparently, and he, because he's operating in eternity, every one of those decisions that every one of those 106 billion people have ever made, it's all now to him. And his desire is to bring good out of every one of those situations. He does not want to punish them. He does not want bad things to result from them. He wants to give every opportunity of bringing good out of every single one of those decisions. And even our most stupid or bad decisions, his desire is something good. He does not want to teach us a lesson. There are sometimes consequences from our decisions from a natural perspective that we perhaps have to face, but that is not God bringing that on us. He wants to bring good out of everything so that we can learn and grow through the decisions we make. And therefore, when he showed me a glimpse of that, and it was just a glimpse, it totally almost fried my understanding, because, you know, he can cope with 106 billion decisions every second, and I can just about cope with making my decisions every day. And so it just completely overwhelmed me with a perspective of how loving, generous, merciful, and kind God is, and how his desire and very nature is that he would bring good out of every one of those things. And that changes a perspective on judgment completely. You know, and I think the religious people and the enemy would want people to promote this, you know, is wanting them to see God as this harsh taskmaster waiting to pounce on us if we get it wrong and punish us if we get it wrong. You know, God isn't like that at all. You know, God loves us. If we're separated from him, or anyone is separated with him from eternity, it's because they've chosen to be, not because he sent them into that position. People choose separation from him because they reject the offer of restoration and reconciliation in Christ. It's not because he wants anyone to be separated. In fact, you know, it says that he wants none to perish.
That's good. Thank you, Mike. And you know what? Thank you for the new round of engaging manual. I'm excited about starting. I'm going to start it all over and just go through it. But I was interested in the soaking you started out with. I wondered if I wanted to start there and then circle back, because that sounded like something I need or want to do.
It's just the latest. It's the latest module 4 teaching on the garden, the dance floor, the soaking room, and the bridal chamber. The sort of 4 chambers of the heart, in regard to transformation at a deeper level. So, you know, I wouldn't jump into that before you've looked at the other things in session 4, but you know, if you're at that point, you know, if you're at that point in session 4, then do it. You know, if you do want to go back, then that'll be fine. But yeah.
Thanks. So I'm getting ready to go into my conference, and love you guys, and thank you very much.
All right. Okay. See you soon.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else got anything they'd like to share, testify, ask?
Hey, Mike, this is Stephen.
Hi, Steve.
I'm sitting there with our bench, and I had heard you speak on releasing the light, blue light. Can you touch on that real quick and tell what the result was? Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. I was on my mountain one day doing some legislative things, and Jesus came to me. And he'd never actually come like that before. He had invested me in authority on the mountain, but he'd never just come when I was there. And he spoke to me and he said, "I want you to release a blue light call." And that was it. So I thought, well, how do I release a blue light call? Well, I just simply said from that position of authority, I release a blue light call. That was it. And it can be as simple as that sometimes. And I felt like a blue light go out from one of the stones, the blue stone on my crown that I was wearing, and I felt that blue light go out. And then I felt to send angels out with scrolls that carried a blue light with them, and that was it. I just left it. And then a week later, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a local leader in another church. And he spoke to me as we were walking out of a meeting. He said, do you know anything about blue lights? And I smiled and said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I keep getting these blue lights dancing around me. So I sort of explained to him that, this was a call. It was a call to the Joshua generation to rise up, to come into government, to come in positions of government. That God was calling people out of the old to come into the new. And I've had lots of testimonies from people all over the world who have had blue lights engaging them in their rooms, blue orbs coming into their rooms, blue lights flickering around them. Lots of testimonies where that blue light came, and a number of people have responded to that, and when they've heard me talk about it, in saying, yeah, I accept the call to come into another level of government authority, or come into another level of intimacy with God. But definitely it was something that, and I've repeated it a number of times over the last couple of years, because we're still wanting to see people come out of the old coverings of men and come into a new freedom in Christ, in being able to access heaven for themselves, come into government, which is foundational to release other people into their destinies as well. So yeah, that's something that I've done and I'm still doing. I'm calling into the wilderness and calling into the valley of decision, calling for people to respond to heaven's sound, to things like lights, blue lights, and things that are calling them to respond to. Because blue's a very interesting color. You have the sapphire pavement and the sapphire throne. There's a lot of blue. I like blue anyway, but there is a lot of blue in the realms of heaven. You have the sapphire cube and Metatron's cube, which engages blue. There does seem to be a connection between blue and governmental things and authority. So, yeah. So was anything specific on that, or was that just what you wanted to know about that?
Yeah, because I feel like that's what happened to me. The Lord said, release the blue light. And I'm like, wait a minute, where have I heard that before?
Yeah.
And so I went flipping through some of your teachings, and I heard you speak about it. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of hear what your side was again.
I do believe that we all need to be calling out to those that we know, those that are stuck in old systems, covered by men, not free to pursue their destiny. We need to call them to cross over into their heavenly inheritance, to cross beyond the veil, to come into their heavenly realms. There are so many that are stuck where they are, and I think God is wanting us to take responsibility and to begin to call for people to come out of the valley of decision, to make a decision to cross over, rather than stay in the wilderness and miss out on the fullness of their inheritance in God. And one of the things I've been administrating is for Emmaus Road encounters, where Jesus met the two disciples on the Emmaus Road. They didn't recognize him. and he gave them revelation and unveiled himself. I believe God wants to unveil himself to people at a totally different level of experience and encounter that would cause people to respond and follow him. And I believe it's up to us who are forerunners, who have crossed and are engaging in the realms of heaven, to begin to outwork those things and to begin to call and release sounds and lights, targeting people groups, ministries, mountains, in the wilderness. You know, as God gives you a mandate, target that call, focus it. You know, you can have a general blue light call that goes out in the realm of the spirit, but you can also have a focus light, which is like a laser beam, if you like, and focus and target specific people or specific ministries that are covering people and not letting them engage, you know, into the fullness of their inheritance, because they have to go through a leadership structure which is top down, and hindering them. You know, and we need to call people out of that. You know, years ago I would have thought, well, that's a bit harsh, but actually my heart and God's heart is for people who are not coming into their inheritance. So, you know, I have a desire and a love for people, so I'm willing, you know, to do that, and I have no sort of conscience about it, because it's like, why would I want to see people stuck in a religious system that's limiting their sonship? You know, and some of those religious systems I honor in what they've done in the past and how they've helped us get to where we are. But Moses brought the people up to the promised land, but he didn't lead them in. You know, and I honor Moses' generation leaders and some of the amazing things that they've done. But those that are now rejecting the crossing over into another dimension, because to be honest, a lot of them have built mountains and ministries and businesses in the wilderness, and they're unwilling to let go of them to cross over into something new, because this is new and they don't necessarily understand it, and therefore a lot of them are unwilling to cross, and therefore they're keeping people back from crossing. They're giving a bad report, some of them, and I think God wants to set people free, and so I would call into anywhere that God mandated me to call into, to see people come out and become free.
And that's what I think our bench mandate's for, not to judge the things that we see wrong in the city, but to call people into their destiny.
Yeah, no, definitely so, yeah. I would say for anybody who's a forerunner and is crossed into something themselves, we must freely give away what we freely received. You know, and we don't have to do it from a sense of, well, you're doing everything wrong. We just have to call people into something new, and you know, not get into the debates about what people are doing but actually just demonstrate something new. Be a demonstration of what it is to walk in the light and what it is to walk in the realms of heaven, and pass that testimony of, this is a good report. You know, Joshua and Caleb spied out the land and they gave a good report. You know, they didn't focus on the giants, they didn't focus on the negative things. You know, but the 10 other spies gave a bad report and put people off, and so a whole generation of those who were of the age of responsibility died. You know, sadly, in the wilderness, having never received the promises that God had for them. Yeah. Please feel free to share if you have a testimony about that sort of thing.
Yeah, about 10 days ago, I've been, every now and then I'll have a sovereign encounter, and my shoulders were on fire. And then I noticed there were 2 men in white linen, one on each side of me, and what I would have considered an angel before, I now recognize as a men in white linen. And they took me to a court where there were a group of religious leaders, and they were specifically passing judgment on some of the things on social media. They had a folder with various names that you and I would know, and I just kind of sent them running. I sent Mercy and Grace following them, But I sent them running, and I took the folder. And then I was taken to the Court of Oracles, and the scribe that always helps me just came, took the folder from me, and said, "We've got it." But there were names in there, mine included. There were names in that folder that they were saying, "We've got to do something about this movement. We've got to do something about what they're saying and what they're doing, and they're hurting the church." And it was just like, whoa, this isn't God, you know. And the interesting thing that it was men in white linen who took me there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they would, because they have a vested interest in the church fulfilling its mandate and coming into maturity and becoming, you know, the bride spotless without wrinkle and blemish, you know, as the church matures, so that they are very active, involved in a lot of what's going on right now. But of course there are, you know, whenever the old move is faced with a new move and something that God's doing, a lot of them don't embrace it, and they then oppose the next move, and rather than passing the baton and support it. And you know, we have movements, ministries that have said, you know, we want our ceiling to be the next generation's floor, but when it comes to it, they're not prepared to pass the baton on to that generation. You know, they want to maintain it for themselves, and that's what we need to see. You know, an ongoing passing to the next generation and a raising up of people and encouraging people. And of course, you have the criticism that's out there of, you know, people of being Gnostics and mystics and all the sort of negative connotations they put on some of these things, because they're fearful and they don't want people to embrace these things. Now, you know, you have the, you know, the religious police who always want to police the church and, you know, keep everyone on the orthodox path of the straight and narrow, you know. And you know, if they'd had their way, we'd still be in the dark ages in reality. But God is wanting to unveil something new, and he's calling people into the new, and he will deal with those people who are hindering and restricting. And I fully believe that Moses died in the wilderness, and I believe that there are, of that old generation, they're starting to die off. Those that are not embracing the new and embracing a transformation of their lives are going to die off, and you'll start to see many well-known leaders who have been at the forefront of some of the things God's been doing in the past start to get removed because of their unwillingness to embrace what God is doing and their opposition to it, and then their criticism of the things that God is actually drawing people into today. Now, it's not, you know, my heart is that those people are free and that those people come into truth and revelation, and I'm always administrating for that and calling out to them, sending lights and things for those people to see a new dimension of God. And some do, and there are some, you know, good testimonies of people who have changed their view recently, and I think that's great. But there are still others that are still in opposition. And of course, you get further down the food chain in these top-down systems, when things get passed down, almost the more legalistic it becomes. So, you know, when Bethel, you know, did their exposing of Jason Westerfield and that stuff, you then had Bethel churches around the world then telling people they couldn't listen to Ian Clayton or Justin Abraham because they were Gnostics. Now, I'm sure Bethel Church in Reading didn't say that, but the next levels down often take a more hard line, and they were, you know, there's a church in, I know, church in Melbourne that operates under that, and they were very, very specific in telling their people they should not listen to this stuff, it's wrong and stuff. Now, you know, it's a dangerous thing to do, but we have history to say that's generally what happens, you know, and we must never let that happen to us. You know, there's a harvest coming and a generation that we must pass the baton to. We're all about releasing them into their fullness, truly, that our ceiling can be their floor, and then as they go higher, they pull us with them. You know, because if their floor gets higher and higher, then our ceiling gets higher and higher. We just have to embrace that they are going to go ahead, and our role is to help them engage their inheritance and outwork it, you know, and encourage them to keep going further and higher. You know, not to try and oppose them and hinder them because, oh, well, we're fearful that we're now going to lose our positions. At the end of the day, we don't need a reputation. We don't need a position. You know, the position of a leader is to be in the dirt so people can stand on them. That's what a foundation does. You know, and Jesus made it really clear that we should not be here to be served, but to serve. And Paul basically said that the foundation of the church is the apostles and prophets, the foundation of the church, not the covering or the roof of the church, the foundation. Well, where do you put the foundations? In the dirt, so that actually something can be built upon it. You know, and that means that you're under people, not over them, and you're encouraging them to be able to engage God for themselves, not having to come through you as a mediatorial position. And every Old Testament, Old Covenant thing is mediatorial. You know, and the New Covenant is not mediatorial. Our mediator is Christ, who is in heaven. And yeah, Jesus said, not about lording it over people. And, you know, therefore our motives is always must be for a blessing and to release others into their destiny, not try and control them into fitting into ours. You know, they need to be living stones of a blueprint, but that is who they are, not who we call them to be or where we want them to fit. They need to fit together where God places them and what God does to release them into their destiny, without doubt. So, yeah. Okay. All right.